Prithivish Tarikshagam Shantir Dyaus Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragnish Shantir Vayush Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra Sukhinas Santu. Sarve Santu Niramayaha. Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu. Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Sarvastaratu Durgani. Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu. Sarvas Sadbuddhimapnotu. Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin today on verse number 12 of the 5th chapter. That will be on page 116. Eko vashi sarva bhutantaratma ekam rupam bahudha yav karoti tamatmastham ye anupashyanti dhirav tesham sukham Shashvatam netaresham. That one supreme ruler, the soul of all beings, who makes his one form manifold, those wise men who perceive him as existing in their own self, to them belongs eternal happiness and to none else. What Yama points out here is that the happiness that all of us feel in our heart now and then at present seems to come from objects, people, places, things outside of us. But the real source of that happiness is the self. But because of our ignorance, we think that that happiness is coming from outside without recognizing that the source of that happiness is within me. The example that is sometimes given in Vedanta texts is of a camel. A camel is eating from a thorny bush, and as the leaves, usually many of the plants and trees that grow in desert are very tend to be thorny. They have some leaves, and so the camel, when it's eating those leaves, sometimes those thorns go and puncture the camel's lips, and it's pretty dry, those leaves are. But because the blood starts oozing out from the camel's lips, that blood mixes up with the leaves that the camel is eating. And the camel thinks, oh, finally I'm able to chew them so well that I'm able to extract the juice out of those leaves. And so finally now these leaves are tasting really sweet or really delicious, whatever. But this example is given sometimes to show that what makes those leaves juicy is really the camel's own blood. But the camel is not able to recognize that its own blood is really making those dry leaves tasty. Now this is the example given to show that when we say eat ice cream, and the ice cream seems to make us happy, it's not really the ice cream that is the source of joy, but there is the self. Because if the ice cream itself had joy embedded in the ice cream itself, then that ice cream would always, no matter what, make anyone who eats that ice cream happy. But there are some people, I doubt there are any people, but there may be some people who hate ice cream. And then that ice cream may not make them happy. Or even if I love ice cream, how much can I eat at one sitting? If someone says, here are these 100 cups, and you have to finish it now, maybe the first few cups I'm going to enjoy. And then later on, it's just going to be torture. Now, if that joy was contained in the ice cream itself, that wouldn't have happened. And there are explanations for it. And one of the simplest explanation for how the self is the source of joy is that whenever we feel disturbed, then our connection with the self is not very clear. The example is that if you have, let's say, a photograph in a tub filled with water, and if you disturb that water, then you're not able to see that picture at the bottom of the tub clearly. But if the water is still, then you can see the picture. Similarly, the lake of the mind is often compared to a lake in yoga texts. So when that mind, the lake, the water in the mind, so to speak, is disturbed, and that's what all these thoughts, hopes, emotions, feelings that we have are like the waves in the lake of the mind. Now when this water of the mind, so to speak, is disturbed, we are not able to see our own self clearly because of the disturbed water. So whenever now my mind gets disturbed by, oh, I need to have an ice cream, I love ice cream. So these thoughts of ice cream, the desire for ice cream, disturbs the peace of my mind. And my connection with the self is not as clear. And then I'm unhappy because we know that. Whenever our mind is filled with desires, we become restless. Now, when I have desire for ice cream and then I start eating ice cream, my desire is fulfilled. So that disturbance that was created in my mind by this lack of ice cream, that lack is now eliminated. And so the mind becomes calm after that fulfillment of that desire. And because of the calmness of the mind, the Atman, the spirit which is shining, is able to shine brightly now because the water is still. Now that shining brightly of the Atman manifests as bliss, that Ananda. But because of my ignorance, I think that Ananda is coming from the ice cream, not from... But of course we know that Ananda which is coming doesn't remain for too long. Because as soon as you finish it, then there's a desire, or maybe I would like to have one more. And then the mind gets disturbed again. And so that's the only reason why we don't feel that joy always. Now what this verse points out is, who is the one who experiences joy? He says, to them alone belongs eternal happiness, to no one else. Now, who is that? Who are those people who perceive the spirit as existing in their own self? Tam atmastham, within oneself. Now, oftentimes when we speak about the spirit within ourselves, we think about it in spatial terms. It's like water inside a glass. Now, the Atman is not inside the body the way something is there inside a container. Because, first of all, the body is a material entity and the spirit is non-material. So it just doesn't, it does, in Sanskrit, there is a phrase called adheya and adhara. That is a container and that which is contained in that container. Now, a container and a contained have to belong to the same level of reality. That is, the water that I imagined in my dream last night, I cannot pour into this glass that I have in my hands right now when I wake up in the morning. Because the water of my dream and the glass of the waking state belong to two levels of reality. In the same way, when I say the spirit is in me, it's not spatially because this body belongs to this material level of reality and the spirit is non-material. So in what does it mean then? It's that the spirit within me, in my heart. The closest analogy, if we can think about is like seeing our image inside a mirror. So when you stand before a mirror, you say, well, I'm in there. But I'm not in there the way a water is there inside a glass. And yet, I am there, I'm kind of reflected in it. So it's in that sense that the spirit is within the body. Not as a container and as something contained within, but as something that is reflected within the body. And the best manifestation of that reflected reality is the consciousness we ascribe to the body. Why do I feel that the body is conscious? Why do I feel that the mind is conscious? So the consciousness, the movement, the sense of life, everything that I'm doing, this consciousness is not really, doesn't belong to the body. It's the consciousness of the spirit which is being reflected through the body. So that is what is meant by saying tam atmastham, those who perceive him as existing in their own self. Here, self really means the body. So because we often refer to this, myself, I am sitting here. But what is really sitting is this body is on this chair. So we use the word self often to refer to the body. So in the translation it says, who perceive him as existing in their own self. It really means who perceive the spirit as existing in their own body. And existing the way I explained to you, as a reflection inside a mirror. So that one supreme ruler, the soul of all beings, Sarva Bhuta Antaratma, the Atma is the self, Antaratma means the inner self, Sarva Bhuta means of all people. So the one inner spirit which is present in all people, that is what is meant by the soul of all beings. The one supreme ruler, the word Ishvara often gets used in Sanskrit. It comes from the root ish, means to rule. So Ishvara literally means the supreme ruler. And we've seen this phrase attached to the supreme reality, to God, in different traditions. We often think of God as the, in the Christian tradition, we speak of the kingdom of God. God is the supreme king, the supreme ruler. So this idea that one who controls the entire creation, this has found expression in many traditions. Who makes his one form manifold. Now we see Upanishad says that the divine is one. And yet that same one divine manifests as so many different living and non-living entities. Now how come what one manifests as many, only through the differences of name and form. Even from a purely material standpoint, if we see, it's possible to see everything in this room as just so many atoms and molecules, or just electrons and protons. So really, there is no diversity here. It's just atoms and molecules. But then we say, well, certain molecules shaped in a certain form, then I say, well, that's a chair. And this is the human being, and this is an animal, this is that. So these, just like the same atomic particles, when configured in different way, with different kinds of forces holding them together, we give them different names and apparently think that there are many things. In the same way, this one reality that is manifesting itself through this very diverse creation, and the only thing that distinguishes one thing from another is the different names and forms that are ascribed to them. Now, those who perceive this one reality manifesting in so many different ways as one dwelling in their own heart, only to such people belongs eternal happiness. In other words, only such people can be truly happy. It's not that we are not happy now, but our present happiness is punctuated by times of pain and sorrow and anxiety. So we have bits of happiness now and then. But if I want a happiness which is unalloyed with any kind of pain and sorrow, then I must be able to perceive that one infinite spirit within me. Those who are able to do it are able to experience that eternal happiness. Sukham Shashvatam means eternal happiness. So right now, we all get happiness now and then, non-eternal. The good thing is, even the pain is non-eternal. And that's why in the Upanishads, when they speak about heaven and hell, neither of these are considered to be eternal places. So if we are not happy with the idea that happiness is not eternal, to compensate for that, we know the hell is not eternal either. And the only eternal joy we can have is if I'm able to perceive that one transcendent reality in the midst of this stupendous diversity in and around us. Next verse, 13. Nityo anityanam chetanaschetananam eko bahunam yo vidadhati kaman tamatmastham ye anupashyanti dhiraha tesham shantihi shashvati netaresham. He, the eternal among non-eternals, the intelligence in the intelligent, who though one fulfills the desires of many, those wise men who perceive him as existing within their own self, to them belongs eternal peace and to none else. So the third and fourth line are almost identical in these two verses, except that in the first verse number 12, those people who perceive that one spirit within themselves, to them belongs eternal happiness. And then this verse says, the same people, to them belongs eternal peace. In other words, the two always go together. If someone says, oh, I'm extremely happy, but I'm not at peace, then you begin to wonder whether that happiness is real. Or if someone says, I'm totally at peace with myself, not really happy, that doesn't go either. So peace and happiness in their ideal state will always go together. So what this verse points out is, Nityo anityanam. Among all the perishable, non-eternal things that we see around us, there is only one non-perishable entity, and that is the spirit. Sometimes the word for perishable is called akshara, and the imperishable is called akshara. So the one non-perishable or imperishable or eternal reality in the midst of everything that is perishable, chetananam, It's translated here as the intelligence in the intelligent. You could also translate this as the one consciousness in the many apparent consciousnesses. I don't think consciousness has a plural. It's exactly what we were speaking about before. That right now we might say, well, there are so many conscious beings here. So consciousness is now, we could, if we want to put a number to it, as many number of people who are in this room, we would say that many centers of consciousness are here. And so what this verse says, Chaitanas Chaitananam, that this is the one consciousness, the source of consciousness among all these apparently many. How do you do when the word doesn't have a plural, or you don't know what the plural is? It's like the dilemma one person had. He had two sons, and each of them wanted a pet, and they loved mongoose, and so they said, each of us would like to have a mongoose as a pet. And so this person wanted to order them online. And so when he had to write a letter to that pet shop who were supplying, and so he didn't know the plural of the word mongoose. Now the goose plural is geese. But what is the plural of mongoose? Is it monkeys or mongooses? So he wasn't sure. And so he found a way. So he wrote to them, hi, I would like to get a mongoose. I would like to order a mongoose. And by the way, send one more mongoose. So, well, that's my dilemma here when I say this one consciousness and this another consciousness, and so many different kinds of consciousness. So what is meant is this. Now, sometimes we can get hurt or injure ourselves, or even really burn ourselves through extremely boiling water being poured on our hands, or we could touch a red hot piece of iron or any metal which is extreme with a very high heat. So there are any number of different ways by which my skin can get burnt. Through boiling water, through some extremely, well, whatever, different things. Now, I might say my hand got burned by water or by metal or by iron or whatever. The truth is that neither that power to burn, that heat, was not intrinsic to the water or to the metal. So the real burning that occurred, it happened because of heat. So just as heat is the primary source, and that heat could then manifest itself through liquids, through metals, through any number of things, in the same way, the spirit is the primary source of consciousness. And it can manifest itself through a human body, through an animal body, through plants. So depending on the medium through which it is trying to express itself, that consciousness might apparently look different or seem different. And that's how we are able to make a distinction between a plant, an animal, a human being. Then we make distinction between human beings as well. We don't see all human beings as exactly identical. So all these differences that we see is because of the expression, not in the power itself. It's a little bit like the electricity. Depending on whatever fixtures we use, whatever color bulbs you use, or a fan, or whichever gadgets we use the power of electricity to run, the gadgets themselves are very different. But the main source is the electric power for these gadgets. In the same way, consciousness will manifest in many different ways, but the real source is the spirit. That is what is meant by Chaitanas Chaitananam. That is what they translated here as the intelligence in the intelligent. The one who fulfills the desires of many. So although the reality is one and undivided, we know that all of us now, apparently many, we have our desires, and when our desires are fulfilled, we feel happy. So that one reality, that one supreme ruler is the one who distributes what is due to us. And it's a very unfailing system, and that's what we call the law of karma, that based on whatever we have done, the power that gives us our just deserts, if you like, the happiness and the pain that we experience as a result of our own activities, past or present, physical or psychological, that distribution occurs through the power of that one reality. And that is what is meant by saying the one who, though one fulfills the desires of many. Now, all those people who are able to perceive this reality within their own heart, to them belongs eternal peace. The bottom line is that, therefore, if we want to be truly happy, if we want to be truly peaceful, if we want to experience eternal peace, and eternal peace sometimes sounds scary because that's what we generally say about people after death. But so here, nobody's talking about death. We can experience that eternal peace right now while living. We can experience that eternal happiness right now. So don't think in terms of a post-mortem experience, something that will happen after we die. The good thing about the Upanishadic teaching is that it says that you don't have to wait until death in order to experience all of this. Everything can be experienced right here, right now. All that we need to do, simple, is perceive that one reality within us. Done. That's what it is. At least in concept, it's a very simple thing. But those of us then who have tried to do this, we recognize the difficulty. The difficulty is not in the truth itself. That's pretty simple, that the spirit is within me. That's the simple truth. What makes it difficult is removing all the wrong ideas, wrong notions that we have grown up with. And in life, that's generally the case. Learning anything new is not difficult at all. Unlearning the wrong things that we have learnt, that is difficult. So really in spiritual life, the struggle is not so much with learning. The struggle is with unlearning. And that's the main challenge. Verse 14. Tad etad iti manyante anirdeshyam paramam sukham katham nu tat vijaniyam kimu bhati vibhati va. The sages perceive that indescribable supreme joy as this is that. How shall I know that? Does it shine in its own light, or is it effulgent in another's light? So the earlier verse spoke about eternal happiness. So Yama here points out that the sages, that is the texts, and the people who have become enlightened, they perceive this indescribable supreme joy, that paramam sukham, paramam means supreme, anirdeshyam, indescribable, tad etad means this is that. In other words, the enlightened beings actually experience that joy. They don't just talk about it. They are not describing it as a concept. It's not just an idea. It's a directly perceived reality. And so he says, the sages perceive that indescribable supreme joy as this is that. The phrase that gets used in the text often is called kara amalakavat, as a fruit in one's hand. So you have an apple in your hand, and if your eyesight is good enough, you will say, wow, the truth. I have no doubt that there is an apple in my hand because I can feel it, I can see it, it's so close. Now, when that presence of the Spirit in my heart will become that much clear, that much closer, that much beyond doubt, that is what is meant by saying, this is that. Now, the question is, how will I know that? What is the way to know that reality? Does that reality, does the Spirit shine in its own light, or is it effulgent in another's light? In other words, to experience let me put it this way. How can I be conscious of that one consciousness? Yes, the Spirit is the source of consciousness. But now where can I get, and the body is not conscious on its own, the mind doesn't have its own consciousness, but these are the only two things I have. So now how can I perceive that source of all consciousness with the instruments which themselves are not conscious in themselves? That is the question. So how do I become conscious of the consciousness? It's a little bit like when we say people speak about being mindful. So being mindful of every action, being mindful of every activity, being mindful of every thought, which is a very helpful practice. And the question here is, how can I be mindful of my mindfulness? So I can be conscious that I'm conscious of the fact that I'm lifting this in my hand. How can I be conscious of the fact that I'm conscious that I'm lifting this in my hand? So that is the basic question that is being raised here. And it's a rhetorical question, but it's a question that will be answered in the last verse of this chapter, verse 15. Na tatra suryo bhati, na chandra tarakam, nema vidyuto bhanti, kutoyam agnihi, tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam, tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. This is a very often quoted verse, one of the well-known verses of this Upanishad. The sun does not shine there, nor the moon and the stars, nor these lightnings, and much less this fire. When that shines, everything shines after that. By its light, all this is lighted. So the question was, how do I perceive the self? How do I perceive the Spirit? Now, in order to see things, most of us, most of the time, the one source of light that we are all familiar with is the sun. Now, because of modern science, we know that in the larger scheme of things, the sun is no big deal. It's not even the brightest star in our own galaxy. It's a pretty insignificant star. That may be in this larger universe, but we, in this little, miserable little planet that we are, for us, the sun is the brightest object known. And most of our activities in the daytime, we are able to see things by the light of the sun. Now, if I have to see the Atman, will the light of the sun help me? With the light of the sun, daytime I can see many things. Can I see the Atman? That is what is meant by the sun does not shine there. Sorry, the light of the sun is not enough. Light of the sun cannot help me in seeing the Spirit. Okay, then maybe, well, if it's not the sun, the moon and the stars at night. Night, if I'm meditating, if there's how can I see the Lord if it's a new moon night? Will full moon night be helpful? Obviously, the idea is no. Neither the light of the moon and the stars can reveal the Spirit, nor the lightning, much less this fire. And we can add on, well, not electricity, none of these things. None of these things will reveal the spirit. Then what? When that shines, everything shines after that. What is meant is the power to reveal, the power to shine that the sun has during the day, the power to reveal or the power to remove darkness to whatever extent that the moon and the stars have at night, or the lightning, or fire, or electricity. All of these things shine only after the spirit. Now, what does it mean? Why will I need the spirit to see in this electric light? Or why will I need the spirit to see everything in the day? Does the sun depend on me in order for me to light, to see the world? And the answer is yes. Think about it this way. When you're fast asleep, and you don't, let's say someday you don't wake up early, the sun is up. As long as you're asleep, you are not aware of this world, and clearly you are not aware of the rising of the sun either. So the sun is up, shining, revealing the world, but as far as you are concerned, it's just darkness inside. Well, if you're seeing a dream, the light that you see in your dream is not provided by the sun. The light that you see in your dream is provided by your own mind. And so, the sun is totally ineffective, if you like, unless and until I become aware of the sun. Only when I wake up, I become aware of the sun, then the sun's power to reveal everything becomes clear. So the sun, if the sun had an intrinsic power to reveal everything, then it would not have depended on my being conscious of it. So only when I am conscious of the sun is revealed, and the sun then in turn reveals everything. Only when I become conscious of the moon, the stars, the lightning, the fire. Now, for instance, right now here, I can just, now of course, if I close my eyes, at least my mind will tell me that the room is still lighted. So the mind is still perceiving it because of the memory. But if I'm now asleep here, this light is not going to help me. So that is the idea. So the source of all consciousness is the Atman. This goes to a little bit of a more intricate philosophical concept, which we will not discuss too much, but I think it's good to keep that in mind. And we have referred to that on earlier occasions as well. One of the major hurdles every Vedanta student has to overcome is unlearning the idea that we have gotten so used to, that the world that I experience outside of me has an existence independent of me. That is a major hurdle. It's going to sound audacious, but essentially, the world that I see depends on me. By depends on me, I mean, if I'm fast asleep, if I'm not aware of this world, how do I know there is a world? Does the world exist when I fall asleep? And we are so tempted to say, of course it exists. I may be asleep, but there are others who are awake and they have experienced it. And so when I wake up, I can ask them and I can be sure that the world was there. that is where the problem comes, because I have not experienced it. Now, if I'm able to take that as a sufficient evidence that the world exists when I'm not aware of it, then for people who accept this, and I think science does accept it, then for science to say, I question the existence of God, becomes problematic. Because a lot of times people become very ultra logical, if you like, it's like, well, I will believe in God only if I see God myself. Then why don't same people say, I'll believe that the world exists when I'm asleep, only when I see it myself? That time we just accept it as true depending on the testimony of somebody else. In the same way, well, there have been people who say they have seen God. Now, why will I doubt that? And I'm not against doubting it. I'm just saying, if I doubt that, then to be consistent, I should even doubt whether the world existed when I was fast asleep. That is the main dilemma. And the conclusion that Advaita Vedanta comes to is if that one reality alone exists, then all duality is a perception born out of ignorance, born out of some kind of a distortion of reality. And so the idea that things outside of me live independently of me is as fallacious as that. And you see that idea to some extent is present. We don't push it far enough. People speak about charity begins at home. That is, if I want to do anything, first I must do it myself, and only then I can. And what Vedanta says is, everything begins at home. In other words, if I have to change the world, I have to change myself. If I change, the world changes for me. And this we can see clearly in how these great ones have spoken about the world. You see the words of the Buddha, words of Jesus, words of Ramakrishna, words of Shankaracharya, all of these ones, they speak about the world in very different ways than you and I do. Ramakrishna, for instance, said, I just see it filled with the divine. And he didn't live that long ago, just barely just a little over 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Now, the people who lived, who were his contemporaries, they also saw the world, but they didn't see it filled with the divine, but Ramakrishna did. Then we have to say, well, if they lived in the same world, then they should have seen the same thing. So, someone was not seeing things clearly. And there were people who say, well, these enlightened ones who say it's all divine, etc., there's something wrong with them. They were not seeing it clearly. And what we see, this is real. And then those who take spiritual life seriously, for whose heart, just like in Nachiketa's heart, that Shraddha, that deep faith has entered, they say, no, I think these few people, even though they might have been a very small minority, what they said about the world, that seems to be more true. So the majority may not always be right. So in that sense, spiritual life is not that democratic. The enlightened ones are always in very small number. Anyway, so I'll stop here now. And so if you have any thoughts, ideas, questions, feel free to share and ask. Yeah.
So Swamiji, right now what I feel is a consciousness within my body and mind. And that's the reflected consciousness, not the pure consciousness. So how, and again, this is not clear to me, how, with the reflected consciousness, how does one understand the pure consciousness? they're both consciousness in a sense.
They're not both, there is only one.
Right. But yet they're different too. They're not the same. Because the reflected consciousness goes away when you go to deep sleep.
Right. So it's a good question. So the source consciousness, which is now being reflected and refracted also through the body and mind, has forgotten itself, but not forgotten itself totally. Does that make sense? So, so the Atman, which every one of us is, we have forgotten that we are the Atman, but we have not forgotten it totally. I must explain what I mean by that. So one of the ways of understanding that is, we often speak about that ultimate reality as Sat Chit Ananda. One of the ingredients, so it's not really ingredients, but one way is that to look at it in positive terms, that ultimate reality exists, Sat, it is consciousness, Chit, and it is of the nature of bliss, Ananda. Now, bliss, I said, we are in bliss sometimes, but not always, so it's not really manifesting within us. Consciousness, yes, we feel consciousness, but the consciousness as the reflected consciousness to the body and mind, not the pure consciousness. But existence, we haven't forgotten that. Right now, no matter how ignorant we are, no matter how stupid we may be, but we still, even a most foolish person knows, I exist. So, my awareness of my own existence, that is the way the Atman is manifesting in its pure form right now. So, that my existence, that is Atman. So my Atman, again, my Atman is, speaking using words and language to these terms is so difficult. So the Atman has forgotten its Chit and Ananda aspect. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's essentially the thing. But it has not forgotten its Sat aspect. So because a part of the Atman is still revealed to us right now in its original form, it is that which gives me the power or impulse to then go and look for these missing parts. To kind of bring it to the analogy that is more common about the rope and the snake. When a coiled rope is mistaken for a snake in a semi-lit room, why do we keep on always saying it's a semi-lit room? Because we need a room which has a little bit of light. It doesn't have too much light. If the room is filled with light, then I will not mistake a rope for anything. I will see the rope as it is. If the room is totally dark, I wouldn't see the rope at all. So I cannot mistake it for anything else. Now if I have to mistake that rope for something else, there has to be enough light in the room for me to be able to see that rope, but not as rope. Enough light for me to see there is some object there. Only then I know something is there, but I don't know exactly what it is. Then I'm able to mistake it for a snake. Now, in place of rope, think about the Atman. Now, if the Atman is totally covered, I'm fully ignorant of it, it's just darkness. I cannot mistake it for anything. If the Atman is fully revealed as in an enlightened being, then of course I know the Atman to be Atman. I will not mistake it for something. So there is a semi-darkness, or there is a semi-lit reality here. And so a little bit of the Atman is visible, the way just that there is some object. And so what is visible is Sat, that is visible. But what that Sat is, that is hidden. So the rope is visible, but the ropeness of the rope is hidden. And therefore I'm putting a snake up there. I'm seeing a snake. So Atman, that Atman is known. But that ignorance is covering partially the other aspects of the Atman. So, because that existence is known, just as the snake is superimposed on the rope, I have superimposed, in our case, a human being on the divine being. Now that isness of the rope, that rope exists, that existence gets transferred to the superimposed object, the human being. So I feel I, as a human being, I exist. The consciousness of the Atman percolates through this apparent existence of the human body and feel this is conscious. And so to go back to your question, therefore, it's this same Atman which has apparently gotten divided that is now trying to know itself. So it's not that the body and mind is trying to know, because body and mind are just material entities. The Atman in its pure form already knows. So it's this called apparently deluded Atman is trying to know itself.
So in that sense, even the body, the mind, the reflected consciousness is the Atman, but it just simply misperceived. Right?
Yes, Atman misperceiving itself as that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Swamiji, I remember to have read something. I'm not sure if that is a question or a comment on current discussion. That the science believes in reality and observer's reality. It says that the reality changes as per the observer. So the perception that we have changes as per my perspective, and the perception exists because there is a perceptor. If at all there is no one to perceive the things, the perception will not exist. So the last point that you were saying, that the perception exists because there is someone to perceive. The world exists because I can see it after I wake up from the sleep. So it is something that I could relate to, that I have read.
No, but that perception is seeing. What I'm saying is, does the world exist when I'm no longer perceiving it? And material science is just based on the fact that the world has an independent existence outside of me. That's actually a very different paradigm. That's the idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Swamiji, I have a question about cause and effect. You were talking about earlier the distinction between the material and the spiritual. Am I understanding you correctly in that the material is actually the effect of the spiritual? In other words, the cause is actually the spiritual.
Yes and no. Yes and no in the sense that there are two kinds of causes. And one is a material cause, and the other is maybe you could call it an apparitional cause. And that is, for instance now, in order for to make a clay pot, so the clay is the source from which a clay pot is made. And so the clay is a material cause of that pot because it's providing the material for it. But the potter who made that, Potter usually thinks of Harry Potter. A potter who made that pot is also cause, because if the potter weren't there, was not there, then the pot wouldn't have happened. Clay itself wouldn't make itself into a pot. So the potter also is a cause, but not the material cause. And then, of course, you need the potter's wheel, which was also required. So the ingredients necessary in order for a pot to be made, all these three are causes. But there is one is the material cause, one is the instrumental cause, the potter's wheel, and then one is the nimitta karanam, one is the efficient cause, you could say. So in the case of the material world, the Upanishadic worldview says that the material cause for the material, for this world, is really our ignorance. So ignorance is inexpressible in the sense that you can't, how else will you put it? The ignorance is often described in Shankaracharya's Vivek Chudamani, for instance. He describes it as inexpressible. That is, you can't say it is there, you cannot say it is not there. You cannot say both, it is there and not there. You cannot say it is not there and not. Anyway, you cannot say anything about it. And therefore, they just say it is inexpressible. But it's just ignorance. And so ignorance is what transforms itself into the material world. But ignorance itself is not spirit. And so what animates that ignorance, so to speak, or what makes ignorance so powerful to be able to form this material world is the presence of the spirit, which is deluded. The idea is now, what is necessary for me to be able to dream at night? The primary requirement for dreaming is that I should be asleep. I'm not talking about daydreams. We're just talking about the regular, the normal dreams. So the requirement for a dream is that I should be asleep. Now, sleep is nothing but ignorance of the waking world. So ignorance of the waking world is I don't know what's an English equivalent for that. In Sanskrit, they call it Anvaya Vyatireka. Anvaya Vyatireka means, how do I know something is a cause of something else? And one way to say is that when A is present, B occurs. When A is absent, B does not occur. That means A is the cause of it. Now, for dreams, ignorance of the waking world, dreams occur. Knowledge of the waking world is when I wake up, dreams end. And therefore, it's this ignorance is seen as the cause of the dream, cause of the multifarious dream. So I'm just one person, one being who is asleep, creates this manifold, diverse dream world. So if we can think of that one infinite reality were to fall asleep, that ignorance of that would create this material universe. So it's not the spiritual which is directly providing material to it, but it's just the efficient cause.
You've encouraged us in the millisecond when we wake up, just when the eyes open, there's this moment when there's this stillness.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, when there's stillness, there is the absence of ignorance, and therefore the pure reality. Is that?
Yes, I mean, at least conceptually, what we can say is that the first awareness that we have is really just pure awareness. But because of this thing, it very quickly, all the ideas, thoughts, emotions, feeling, forms, names, sound come and cover it. And it's so fast that we almost don't realize that. Yeah. Yeah.
Swamiji, so it seems that we all need this unlearning, many of us, and is it something innate in humans, or is it just the society in which we live where we depend more on the testimony of others and we don't? So I'm wondering whether just as humans, this is just our fate, is that it's challenging for us to get this. So
well, I mean, we are creatures of habit, and we know even our habits, like waking up at a certain time or drinking a cup of coffee at 8 o'clock or whatever. Then once we have done that over a period of time, then we know that we want to change certain habits of ours. we know how difficult it is. Now, doing something differently itself is not like, suppose I say, let's say if I have been drinking a cup of coffee every morning at 8 o'clock, and that's, I've done it for years together, and then I resolve, no, I must drink a cup of coffee at some other time. Now, what is that? Making that resolve is easy. I mean, we all make different resolves in life. But because of my system has gotten used to drinking a cup of coffee, it will tend me. So I will need, it can be changed. All habits can be changed. But you need an extraordinary willpower and determination to change old habits and start new habits. So just as there are these habits which with regard to food and eating and sleep and so on, the way the mind thinks, so the mind has its own habits. And oftentimes, changing the way we think is even more difficult than changing the way of some of our actions. Yeah.
But Swamiji, it seems to me that all of us have the same problem with the mind. So it versus habits of these others, some people drink
All of us
coffee,
except a few.
except a few. So is it something, just is our true nature not to always be unlearned?
No. Our true nature is we are the Atman. That's our true nature.
But I mean, the nature of a human being is the nature of a human being.
Oh yeah, that's it. That's why.
Defines the human being.
Absolutely. So there is certain nature of the body, certain nature of the mind. Then what we can do is we can try to straighten out the mind as much as we can. But the mind itself is never going to be perfect. By perfect, I mean, if something were perfect, it would be indestructible. But the mind is not indestructible. Mind is all said and done. I mean, it's the great instrument. Only when the mind is purified will we be able to reach God. Granted. But the mind is still an instrument. When we reach God, we can say, oh, my mind is purified now. Let me bring my mind along with me. You can't. So the mind will have to be left behind at some stage. And so, yes. So, certain characteristics of the body, for mortality, we can speak about the advances in medical field, etc. But I think most of us agree that no matter we can kind of prolong our lifespan, but I don't think, there are some people who do believe that even physically we might become immortal, but I think most of us feel that that is just the way. The body, being a part of the material world, has to follow the laws of matter. That's essentially the idea. Any other? Anish? Yeah.
So Swami, I was trying to synthesize some of the recent verse and some of the earlier verses. And so the way I'm thinking about some of the things that you said is that there's the objective world, which is something that science makes primary. But there's also the subjective person, and that subjective person science doesn't really pay much attention to, but these teachings are telling us to pay attention to the subjective view. Like when they said earlier, the senses go outward, but you should not go outward, you should look inward. And so that's looking at the subjective perspective. And they're saying that the subjective perspective is more real, is more primary, more fundamental than the objective reality. That's what the teaching is. That the subjective view is more real than the objective reality. Would that be another way of saying?
Yeah. Well, that's one way you could express it that way, certainly. And also, just the realistic look at it is, we are always really dealing with the subjective reality, imagining it to be the objective reality. You see, whatever I try to do in the world, I do it as a result of my perception, my understanding of the world. And that's essentially, that's why Swami Vivekananda in his Karma Yoga talks, he says that there is one whole talk he gave on, we help ourselves, not the world. And the idea is, of course, we must do everything to make the world a better place. We must do everything to help others. But no matter all our efforts at reform of the external objective world, will have some effect, but all of those effects are going to be temporary. I mean, great reformers have arisen in different parts of the world at different points in history, and they have done great work. But why do we need reformers in every generation? We have been around now millions of years. All the problems should have been solved by this time. But we see that problems keep on coming and reformers keep on coming. And it's not even as if the problems are all new. They are the same old problems in manifesting in different ways. In other words, it's an unending job. We have to keep on fixing this machine which is just broken. But if I can now do it in an intelligent way, I may not be able to fix the machine, but I can fix myself. So I may not be able to change the world, but I can change myself. My efforts at changing the world will be temporary, but the change I bring in my own heart, that will be permanent. And so spiritual struggle is therefore not to ignore the world, but to understand the world for what it is, do the best we can to help, and also recognize that the real help, whether or not I realize it or not, the real help is occurring to me. And the trick is this: while I'm helping others, if I'm too focused on the help that is occurring to me, then I'm not really helping others. Then it's not the right way to help, because then that would be my self-interest put before the interest of other people. Then my ego, in fact, gets strengthened. So although it's true that I'm being benefited more than others, that's not what I should be thinking about. Because if that's what I'm thinking about, then I'm not being benefited at all. Is that okay? So we can derive the benefit of helping others if we don't think that I'm helping others to help myself. Okay. Mind, you wanted to say that? Okay. All right. Okay, so we will stop here today, and then next week we will start with the last section of this book. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. For the Sunday satsang, this time we have a guest speaker, Swami Kripamayanandaji, who is the head of the Vedanta Society in Toronto, will be visiting us, and he will speak on karma and the mind. Well, we had an occasion to speak about both the mind and karma today, so we will get to hear more about it on Sunday. The Canadian perspective on it. And on Wednesday and Saturday, we'll continue with our meditation also. Let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, Peace be unto you.